The Dyatlov Pass Incident. What really happened? In February 1959, 9 experienced hikers ventured into the frozen Ural mountains of Russia. None of them would return alive. When rescue teams finally found them weeks later, the scene was so bizarre that it's baffled investigators for over 60 years. Their tent had been slashed open from the inside. The hikers had fled into negative 30-degree temperatures, some barely clothed. And the injuries on some of the bodies. They were so severe that the lead investigator said they were consistent with a high-speed car crash. Yet there wasn't another soul for miles. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident, and today we're diving into what actually happened on that frozen mountain. In late January 1959, a group of 10 Soviet students and graduates set out on a skiing expedition to reach Otterton Mountain in the northern Urals. These weren't amateurs. They were all experienced hikers and skiers, led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, a fifth-year engineering student known for his outdoor expertise. The group consisted of 8 men and 2 women, all in their early 20s, except for Alexander Zolotaryov, a 38-year-old World War II veteran. They were aiming for a Grade 3 expedition, the most difficult category at the time, which would earn them a special certification. On January the 28th, one member, Yuri Yudin, turned back due to illness. He would be the only survivor. The remaining 9 continued toward their destination. Their last known camp was on the slopes of Kolat-Syakhl, which translates to Dead Mountain in the local Mansi language, an ominous name that would prove chillingly appropriate. The group was expected to send a telegram upon their return around February 12th. When that date passed with no word, concern grew. But it wasn't until February 20th that a search and rescue operation was officially launched. On February 26th, searchers found the tent, and immediately, nothing made sense. The tent was still partially standing, anchored in the snow on an exposed slope, but it had been cut open from the inside with multiple slashes. Inside, they found the group's belongings, including their boots, warm clothing, and supplies, all left behind. Whatever had happened, the hikers had fled in such panic that they didn't take time to properly dress or gather their gear. Footprints led away from the tent down toward the tree line about a mile away. Some prints showed people in socks, some in a single boot, some barefoot. The tracks suggested the group was walking, not running in an organized manner, but they abruptly ended where snow coverage became sparse. At the forest edge, under a large cedar tree, rescuers found the first 2 bodies, Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko. Both were shoeless and dressed only in underwear. The cedar tree showed signs that someone had climbed it, with broken branches up to 15 feet high, as if trying to see something back toward the tent or looking for help. A fire had been built near the cedar, and the men appeared to have died from hypothermia. But strangely, they had severe burns on their hands and feet, and pieces of skin were found on the tree bark. Over the next few weeks, 3 more bodies were found between the cedar and the tent, including Igor Dyatlov himself. All appeared to have died from hypothermia while trying to return to the tent. But the last 4 bodies wouldn't be found until May, buried under 13 feet of snow in a ravine, about 250 feet from the cedar tree. And this is where the case gets truly disturbing. While the first 5 victims showed signs of hypothermia with minor injuries, the final 4 had sustained massive trauma. Nikolai Thibault Brignol had severe skull damage. Lyudmila Dubinina and Alexander Zolotaryov had major chest fractures, with their ribs broken so completely that the medical examiner compared the force required to a high-speed car crash. Dubinina was also missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips. Alexander Kolevatova, a severe skull injury as well. Yet here's the bizarre part. There were no external wounds, no cuts, no bruises on the skin. The damage was entirely internal, suggesting an enormous pressure or force, but not from another person or animal attack. Even stranger, some of the victims' clothing was found to contain elevated levels of radiation, though not enough to be immediately lethal. The Soviet investigation concluded in May 1959 with a baffling statement. The hikers died due to a compelling, natural force that they could not overcome. The case was closed, and the records were sealed for decades. So what happened? Over 60 years later, theories range from the plausible to the paranormal. Let's explore the most credible explanations. Avalanche theory. For years, avalanche seemed too obvious and was largely dismissed because the slope wasn't steep enough and there was no clear evidence of one. However, a 2021 study by Swiss researchers used modern computer modeling and concluded that a small, localized slab avalanche could have occurred. The theory suggests that the group cut into the snow to pitch their tent, which destabilized the slope. Hours later, a delayed slab avalanche struck the tent, causing the severe chest and skull injuries to those inside. In panic and possibly disoriented from trauma, they cut their way out and fled down the mountain. This explains the tent being cut from inside, the organized retreat, and the catastrophic injuries. However, critics point out that experienced hikers would likely recognize avalanche danger and that the injuries don't perfectly match typical avalanche trauma. Infrasound-induced panic. This fascinating theory involves a phenomenon called infrasound, which is sound at frequencies below human hearing range. Under certain wind conditions, mountains can create these low-frequency sound waves that cause feelings of extreme dread, panic, nausea, and even hallucinations. The theory suggests that Koletschak's geography and severe wind conditions that night created infrasound that drove the hikers into an irrational panic. They cut their way out and fled, not from a real threat, but from overwhelming psychological terror. The injuries could be explained by falls in the dark, or the 4 victims falling into the ravine, where they were then buried by snow. The missing soft tissues from Dubinina's face could be from natural decomposition in running water at the bottom of the ravine, over the 3 months before discovery. This theory has supporters in the scientific community, but remains difficult to prove definitively. Paradoxical undressing and cold exposure. This explains some aspects, but not others. Paradoxical undressing is a known phenomenon, where hypothermia victims in the final stages before death feel extremely hot and remove their clothing. This would explain why some were found nearly naked. The theory goes that something frightened them from the tent, perhaps a perceived avalanche, military activity in the area, or even just a violent wind that made them fear the tent would collapse. They fled, couldn't return due to deteriorating conditions or disorientation, and died from exposure. The severe injuries could be explained by post-mortem damage from the weight of snow accumulation over months, or falls in the ravine. However, medical experts argue the injuries were peri-mortem, occurring at or near time of death, rather than post-mortem. Military testing. Some theories involve secret Soviet military testing in the area. There were indeed military installations in the region, and the area was known for testing rockets. Some witnesses reported seeing strange orange spheres in the sky around that time. Could the hikers have witnessed something they shouldn't have? Could they have been caught in a weapon test? The radiation on clothing fuels this theory, though the levels detected weren't high enough to cause death. The government's quick closing of the case and sealing of records for decades adds to suspicions. However, there's no concrete evidence of military involvement. and the injuries don't match known weapons of that era. In 2019, Russia reopened the investigation, and in 2021, they officially concluded that an avalanche was the cause. However, this hasn't satisfied everyone. The avalanche theory doesn't fully explain all the evidence, particularly the specific nature of some injuries and the radiation findings. In 2024, a comprehensive analysis suggested that a combination of factors was most likely: an avalanche or snow collapse that injured some members, paradoxical undressing from hypothermia, and the psychological effects of extreme stress and cold, leading to poor decision-making in the dark. The missing tongue and facial tissue from Dubinina, one of the most haunting aspects of the case, is now generally attributed to natural decomposition and scavenging by animals over the 3 months her body lay in running water at the bottom of the ravine. The Dyatlov Pass Incident remains one of the most mysterious deaths in modern history. While we may never know with 100% certainty what happened on that frozen mountain, the most likely explanation involves a combination of natural phenomena, possibly a localized avalanche or snow event that caused panic and injury, followed by severe hypothermia, poor decisions made in extreme conditions, and the harsh reality that even experienced adventurers can fall victim to nature's power. What makes this case so compelling isn't just the mystery, it's the reminder that the wilderness is unforgiving, and that sometimes the most terrifying explanation is simply that nature is more powerful than we can imagine. The pass where they died is now known as Dyatlov Pass, named after the leader who never made it home. 9 lives lost, and a mystery that continues to haunt us decades later. If you found this fascinating, hit that subscribe button. Another unsolved mystery that will keep you up at night will be covered next. Thanks for watching.